Bienvenue à la session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Les droits de l'homme, notre responsabilité collective.
It is my distinct honor to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the 87th Ordinary Session of the African Commission, being held in this warm, beautiful, and historic city of Banjul.
La session que nous ouvrons ce matin revêt une signification particulière, car elle se tient au cours de l'année qui marque la 45e anniversaire de l'adoption de la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, notre instrument de référence, et le 40e anniversaire de son entrée en vigueur. C'est le lieu de rendre hommage à toutes les personnalités qui ont porté la vision, les rédacteurs qui l'ont matérialisé, et particulièrement les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, qui par leurs actions résolues ont permis à l'Afrique de se doter d'un système régional de protection des droits de l'homme ancré dans ses réalités, ses valeurs et ses aspirations.
The African Union Commission reaffirms its commitment to continue the cooperation and complementarity with the Commission in supporting member states to translate commitments into concrete action for the benefit of our people.
We recognize that the silence of the guns in Africa is inextricably linked to the protection of the individuals. Without respect for human rights and accountability, there can be no lasting peace. And without peace, rights remain fragile.
Human rights are not abstract principles. Human rights are about whether a child has access to education and safety. Human rights are about whether a woman has control over her body. Human rights are about whether citizens can speak freely, organize peacefully, and trust the very institutions meant to protect them. Peace and security cannot be separated from governance and human rights. Where justice is absent, instability grows. Where exclusion persists, insecurity deepens. And where institutions fail to protect the dignity and rights of citizens, trust is eroded and tensions rise.
Je peux vous assurer que la Cour, pour sa part, est disposée à collaborer avec les autres organes et de mener à bien notre mandat commun relatif à la protection des droits de l'homme et des peuples.
As Africa embraces technological innovation, we must therefore ensure that emerging technologies remain guided by ethics, inclusion, and the protection of fundamental freedoms.
Together we must build a stronger, more responsive, and truly inclusive African human rights system that protects children's rights today for a prosperous Africa tomorrow.
The spirit of Banjul must travel far beyond these halls. It must reach communities that never sent a delegate to any of our sessions. The legacy of this commission will be measured not by the sophistication of its resolutions,
Honorable Commissioners, distinguished delegates representing the states, NHRIs, civil society organization, I would like to wish you a good day, and we would like to start our deliberations, and I will kindly request the Executive Secretary.
Agenda for today, day 9, which is the last day for the substantive deliberations of the Commission during this 87th ordinary session, will be as follows. We will start with the responses of the Republic of Kenya to the questions posed in relation to the state report, and this will take place between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. Thereafter, we would have for 30 minutes declarations on the human rights situation in Africa under agenda item number 4 for the distinguished delegates who have registered. And thereafter, after the tea and coffee break from 11:30 a.m. until the close of business today, the Commission would retreat into a closed session to consider and adopt the various documents emanating from this 87th ordinary session. Thank you, Chair.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur l'avocat général, chef de mission, Monsieur Laurence Gougui, je voudrais vous souhaiter encore une fois la bienvenue dans ce dialogue constructif qu'on a commencé hier. Aujourd'hui, nous allons entamer la deuxième partie.
For 1 hour, 30 minutes.
It is indeed a pleasure and privilege this morning once again to greet you. Good morning. Chairperson, I wish to confirm that the delegation of the Republic of Kenya remains as introduced yesterday. We acknowledge the positive interaction that we had with the Commission yesterday. We are grateful for the positive comments that the commissioners have given with regards to the report of the Republic of Kenya. And we also took due note of the questions that the Commission requested the Republic of Kenya to give further input on. And so this morning, it is our task to respond to the questions to the best of our ability. Chairperson, we also acknowledge that given the expansive nature of the questions, there could be 1 or 2 questions which may remain not adequately responded to, but we do undertake that we will, in accordance with the procedures of the reporting process, avail in writing any such question that may not be adequately resolved by our responses today. For that purpose, I will begin with an introduction. I will address the questions that related to ratification of various protocols, and then I will invite my colleague delegation to address the specific areas which concern the thematic areas of the 14th report and the Maputo Protocol. Chairperson, Government of Kenya appreciates the Commission's observation that the report, as well as the Maputo Protocol, did comply with the guidelines issued by the Commission. We undertake to continue interacting with the Commission and its guidelines to ensure that all reports that we present indeed meet the standards set by the guidelines issued by the Commission. On the question that was asked with regards to the ratification of various protocols, this is a response of the Republic. Question was asked whether the Republic is aware of the obligation to report on the implementation of the protocol to the African Charter on the rights of older persons in Africa and the protocol to the African Charter on the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. Both these protocols have been ratified by the Republic of Kenya. The Republic of Kenya has embarked on a process of domesticating the principles and provisions of these two protocols. As we did mention yesterday, 2 national laws have been passed: the Persons with Disabilities Act 2025 and the Social Protection Act 2025, and the Older Persons Bill 2026 is currently under consideration. We also have undertaken a process of public consultation with regards to the question of the 1954 United Nations Convention relating to the status of stateless persons, the 1961 United Nations Convention on the reduction of statelessness. And in this regard, we are engaging in internal deliberations which will address the question of these two conventions. With regards to the Convention on the reduction of statelessness, even as these conversations are taking place, Kenya does have legislation which addresses the protection of refugees. Kenya has taken steps to recognize 3 communities that have historically been stateless, the latest of which is Pemba in January 2023. With regards to the Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, the Kampala Convention, indeed similarly, in accordance with the requirements of the Constitution, with regards to public participation, Kenya is also engaged in processes of consulting with the various stakeholders with a view to analyzing the provisions and in the end, indeed considering what direction to take in terms of the treaties, ratification of treaties provisions in our Constitution and the national law. That said, we also do have legislation that addresses the condition of internally displaced persons, conferring on them protection, and therefore, Chairperson, there remains no vacuum. This applies to the Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, which in particular, the committee which was set up to consider the question of ratification has prepared a draft white paper which will guide the process of public participation as we forge forward towards considering the possible ratification of the treaty. On the protocol, optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, the optional protocol to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the second optional protocol to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, aiming to the abolition of the death penalty. Indeed, Chairperson, again, Kenya reiterates that the Constitution does provide robust and extensive provisions with regards to the protection of the rights of all persons from torture, which is non-derogable. It also has provided extensive provisions with regards to access to an independent and impartial judiciary, where all questions of violation, whether of torture or any infringement of the civil and political rights of any citizen, are addressed, canvassed, and remedies given, including an innovative judicial interpretation of the Constitution, which does articulate structural interdicts to remedy constitutional violations. With regards to the protocol to the African Charter, on the rights of citizens to social protection and social security, my colleague will be addressing that particular protocol. On the AU Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, again, Chairperson, it is noted that Kenya is signatory to this convention. Currently, there is wide stakeholder consultation between the state and non-state actors with a view to complying with the constitutional provisions of public participation and eventually informing the process under the Ratification of Treaties Act. Chairperson, with regards to the questions on ratification, I believe we have addressed the concerns that were raised by the Commission, and I now call upon my colleague delegates to answer the other questions aligning with the thematic areas in which they were presented. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, the Commission raised a question on whether the government of Kenya is aware of the obligation to report on the implementation of the protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Older Persons in Africa and the protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Africa, both instruments having been ratified in the year 2022. In terms of preparedness, Chairperson and distinguished commissioners, the government of Kenya wishes to bring to the attention of the Commission the legislative alignment undertaken in anticipation of fulfilling this obligation. As highlighted, in the year 2025, May and August, Kenya enacted the Persons with Disabilities Act of 2025, as well as the Social Protection Act 2025. These two pieces of legislation represent a paradigm shift from the outdated welfare-based model towards a comprehensive, right-based legal framework fully consonant with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, as well as the African Protocol. Further, Honorable Chairperson, the two pieces of legislation provide the legislative architecture upon which Kenya's reporting narrative will be anchored. To operationalize the Social Protection Act, the National Assembly approved the Social Protection General Regulations in 2026, April. That was this year. Currently underway is the development of the key regulations to give effect to the broad provisions of the Persons with Disability Act. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, the Commission raised the question on whether the government of Kenya is considering ratifying the protocol to the African Charter on the Human and People's Rights on the rights of citizens to social protection and social security. We submit that the government of Kenya affirms that it would benefit from ratifying the protocol as it strengthens the constitutional and statutory guarantees on social protection, aligns with regional human rights standards, and addresses gaps in coverage for informal workers, migrants, as well as vulnerable groups. Ladies and gentlemen, in existence, we have the domestic legislation already aligned to some of the provisions of the protocol. Just to name a few, we have the National Social Security Fund Act, we have the Social Protection Act, we have the Persons with Disability Act, as well as the Social Insurance Health Act. In this regard, A multi-agency technical working group has been constituted to analyze the protocol and confirm the expanded obligations, as well as to ensure there is no overlap with existing laws. Honorable Chairperson, as regards measures that have been taken by the Government of Kenya to extend social protection and social security to persons working in the informal sector, we confirm that the National Social Security Fund Act, that is the NSSF Act, established a mandatory contributory pension framework with provisions for voluntary enrollment by informal workers. The government is actively pursuing reforms under the NSSF framework in two directions. Firstly, we have the development of a micro-pension framework which provides accessible, low-denomination retirement saving products for informal workers, including mobile phone-based contribution mechanism, building on Kenya's world-leading mobile money infrastructure. Secondly, we have the Haba Haba pension scheme, which was launched under the NSSF framework and specifically targets informal workers and allows contribution for as low as 50 shillings per day, which is withdrawable via mobile platforms. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, on implementation of Article 54 of the Constitution of Kenya, which provides that the state shall ensure that at least 5% of the members of the public in elective and appointive bodies are persons with disability, we respond by confirming that the enactment of the Persons with Disabilities Act 2025 strengthens the National Council for Persons with Disability as the primary institutional mechanism for monitoring compliance with disability inclusion mandates across all sectors. It further establishes the obligations on both public and private sector employers with respect to reasonable accommodation and inclusive hiring. To highlight some of the progress made in implementation, in addition to the information already captured in our report under paragraphs 73 and 74, we have the Persons with Disabilities Act, which the Cabinet Secretary responsible for matters relating to disabilities formally engaged the Public Service Commission of Kenya to issue circulars requiring ministries, departments, and agencies to streamline their employment data, specifically indicating the number of persons employed. The government has been issuing formal reminders to all ministries, departments, and agencies, reiterating the legal obligation that at least 5% of employment be reserved for persons with disability. Further, Chairperson, Commissioners, the National Council for Persons with Disabilities has taken steps through development of compliance advisories and tools that guide ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as conducting annual disability audits and monitoring frameworks to ensure accountability. Chairperson, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has implemented measures to lower barriers to participation by persons with disabilities in electoral processes, including accessible polling facilities, assistive voting technologies, including braille ballot papers, and tactile ballot guides for visually impaired voters, sign language interpretation at civic education, as well as voter registration forums. Honorable Chairperson, since the Constitution of Kenya guarantees special interest representation by providing nomination of persons with disabilities to both the National and County Assemblies, the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, in partnership with the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commissions, have focused on ensuring that disability quotas have been integrated into recruitment and electoral processes. Sensitization forums, as well as targeted capacity building initiatives, have been undertaken to strengthen inclusive practices and enhance the competitiveness of persons with disabilities for public appointments. These measures have yielded tangible progress with increased representation of persons with disabilities in county assemblies, Board of State Corporations, and senior public service positions. Honorable Chairpersons, on the disaggregated statistics on persons with disabilities in the country, as highlighted in our oral submissions yesterday, as of June 2025, the number stood at 696,780. On whether there is any program or action to protect persons affected by albinism in Kenya, we do submit that the government of Kenya has established targeted programs for persons with albinism coordinated by the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. Interventions include nationwide sunscreen distribution program, provision of protective skincare products, cancer screening initiative, public awareness campaigns to combat stigma and discrimination, and inclusion of persons with albinism in social protection and livelihood support programs. Continuous registration and mapping ensure targeted health and social interventions. The programs are implemented nationally. Honorable Chairperson, the Commission seeks to know whether the specific mechanisms and means that have been put in place to ensure that persons with disability are involved in the development of all initiatives that promote and protect their rights. In response, distinguished commissioners and chairperson, Kenya ensures that participation of persons with disability through structured engagements, mechanism involving organization of persons with disability who are also recognized under the Persons with Disability Act. This include participation, public participation forums, stakeholder consultations during legislative and policy formulation processes, representation of persons with disability within governance and advisory structure, and partnership frameworks coordinated by the National Council for Persons with Disabilities. Organization of persons with disabilities participate in development, implementation and monitoring of disability-related initiatives in line with human rights-based approaches. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, the Commission seeks to know the concrete measures taken to shift away from a charity model which views persons with disabilities as the recipients of welfare towards a rate-based approach. In response, Kenya has progressively transitioned from a welfare-based approach to a human-based rights model consistent with the African Charter and international disability rights standards. The key measures include, firstly, we have the enactment of a right-based disability legislation, our Persons with Disabilities Act, which takes a more progressive approach, affirming the rights of persons with disability to equality before the law, to legal capacity, to human dignity, and access to justice. Secondly, we have the disability mainstreaming across government programs, promotion of accessibility and reasonable accommodation, economic empowerment initiatives, employment promotion, and recognition of persons with disability as right holders and active development partners. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, we can confirm that Kenya, in line with international standards, is moving towards a right-based language in recognizing persons with disabilities as full right holders. Honorable Chairperson, the delegation has been requested to provide specific statistics on older persons in the country. At the moment, Honorable Chairperson, Kenya lacks a comprehensive disaggregated statistic on older persons. However, through the State Department for Social Protection and Senior Citizen Affairs, in partnership with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which is the government agency mandated to collect and analyze official statistics data in Kenya, we are in the process of undertaking a national assessment of older persons in Kenya. A multi-stakeholder technical working group has been formed to spearhead this process. Notwithstanding, Honorable Chairperson, at present, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics collect age-related data primarily through national census and household surveys. Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, we submit. Thank you.
Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners, I will be responding to the questions on the right to work, one of them being that we provide statistics of Kenya's employment and unemployment rates. Honorable Chairperson, according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics Economic Survey 2026, total recorded employment in Kenya increased from 20.8 million persons in 2024 to 21.6 million persons in 2025, representing an increase of 822,100 jobs. The informal sector remained the largest source of employment and accounted for 87.2% of all new jobs created during the period. Employment in the informal sector rose from 17,389 million persons in 2024 to 18,106 million persons in 2025, while employment in modern establishments increased from 3,389 million to 3,495.6 million persons. With regards to unemployment, Kenya's unemployment rate stood at 5.4% in 2025 and is projected to decline to approximately 5% by the end of 2026. Despite this gradual improvement, unemployment remains particularly high among young people. Recent reports indicate that the youth unemployment rate for persons aged 15 to 34 reached 15.25%. On the question of the level of female participation in the labor market and the rate of unemployment among women, Chairperson and honorable commissioners, While women are central to the Kenyan economy, a persistent gender gap remains in formal labor engagement. As of the 2025-2026 reporting period, the female labor force participation rate stands at 63%. This indicates a significant portion of the female population. Remains outside the formal workforce, often due to a higher involvement in unpaid domestic responsibilities compared to their male counterparts, whose participation rate is higher at 71.8%. For the Kenyans in the total workforce, that is between the ages of 15 to 64, women comprise 46.6%. When narrowed down to those who are currently employed, the female share of the population slightly decreases to 45.8%, reflecting a higher incidence of unemployment or labor force exit among women. Unemployment among women remains a critical concern as they are disproportionately affected by labor underutilization and are more likely to be found in vulnerable employment within the agricultural and service sectors. National estimates for 2025-2026 place female unemployment at approximately 7.4%, which is notably higher than the male unemployment rate of around 4.4%. Honorable Chairperson and distinguished commissioners, on the question of the formal minimum age for unrestricted access to work in Kenya, under the Kenyan laws, the protection of children from economic exploitation is a constitutional priority. The Employment Act provides a clear distinction between restricted light work and unrestricted access to the labor market. Prohibition of employment, that is for children under the age of 13 years, is provided for under Section 56(1), which states of the Employment Act, which states that no person shall employ a child who has not attained the age of 13 years, whether gainfully or otherwise in any undertaking. Restricted light work for children between the ages of 13 to 16 years. Children within this age bracket may only be engaged in light work. That is according to Section 56(2). And such work may include, but not limited to, not likely to be harmful to the child's health or development, and not so as to prejudice the child's attendance at school or participation in vocational orientation and training programs provided by the minister or his capacity to benefit from the instructions received. On unrestricted access to work, that's for children of 16 years, the formal minimum age for unrestricted access to work in Kenya is 16 years. At this age, a person is no longer defined as a child for the purposes of basic employment restrictions under the Act, though they are still considered a young person until they turn 18 years. We also have the prohibition of hazardous work for children under 18 years. While unrestricted work begins at 16, Section 53(1) and Section 58 of the Act, alongside the Children's Act, strictly prohibit the employment of any person under 18 years in hazardous environments, including mines, factories with heavy machinery, or any work that is injurious to health or morals. Chairperson and honorable commissioners, on the question about the proportion of informal employment in Kenya, according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics Economic Survey 2026, informal employment remains the dominant source of jobs in Kenya. In 2025, employment in the formal sector stood at 18,106,000 persons out of the total recorded employment of 21,600,000 persons. This excludes rural small-scale agriculture and pastoral activities. This means that informal employment accounted for approximately 83.8% of total recorded employment in Kenya. Thank you.
Chairperson, in relation to right to housing and property, Commissioner Mbonega posed a few questions, and one of the questions was for the delegation to confirm if evictions are only as a last resort, and also provide effective enforcement measures to curb unlawful or forced evictions. This delegation confirms that Kenya has put in place legal and policy safeguards that limit evictions as a measure of last resort. The Constitution of Kenya, under Article 40, protects the right to property and prohibits arbitrary deprivation. Evictions must therefore follow due process and occur only when lawful and justified. In cases of compulsory acquisition for a public purpose or public interest, the law requires prompt payment of just compensation. In addition, the National Council on the Administration of Justice has developed standard operating procedures on court-mandated evictions to guide in the implementation of court-ordered evictions in accordance with the Constitution, applicable laws, and human rights standards. The National Slum Upgrading and Prevention Policy also promotes the protection of human rights in eviction processes affecting informal settlements and slum areas. Chairperson, in regard to extractive industries and environment, Commissioner Dasso requested the delegation to confirm whether we are aware of the guidelines on state reporting and Articles 21 and 24 adopted by the Commission. We respond that this delegation is aware of these guidelines and the government will continue to enhance alignment with the guidelines in future reporting. On the question of legal and institutional framework of extractive activities in Kenya, we confirm that there are key legislation that govern the issue of, that regulate the extractive sector, and some of the key legislation include the Mining Act 2016. This act covers licensing and social impact assessment, community development agreements, and benefit sharing. Another legislation is Petroleum Act 2019. This act governs upstream petroleum, issues of exploration, development, and production. The act also addresses contracts, product sharing, environmental compliance, local content, and revenue sharing. Other related legislation in this sector include Environmental Management and Coordination Act, Community Land Act of 2016, Land Act 2012, and Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, Public Finance Management Act, Access to Information, and Natural Resources Act 2016. In regard to institutional framework related to extractive industries, Kenya has the following institutional framework: Ministry of Mining, specifically the Department of Mines; National Environment Management Authority, that is NEMA, that relates to the issues of environmental licensing and compliance for extractives. Other institutional framework include the county governments, National Land Commission, the Kenya Revenue Authority, and the courts and tribunals for purposes of disputes. Chairperson, a question was posed in relation to the marginalized community. The delegation was requested to provide legal guarantees that require local communities, including marginalized groups and women, provided with adequate opportunities for full participation in all stages of the launch of operations of extractive industry. Kenya confirms that there are several guarantees that exist, particularly in under the Mining Act 2016 and Petroleum Act 2019, aligned with constitutional requirement for public participation in this sector. The Mining Act requires community development agreements for large-scale operations involving consultations and benefits. Under this act, consent is needed for operations on community and private land, local equity participation, and capacity building. Under the Mining Act, the Act has provisions that grants adequate opportunity for local communities, including sub-counties affected, to participate in reviewing and award of permits, local content plans for employment, issues on training and procurement. In addition, the Constitution and the MCA also promotes public participation in environmental decisions. Another question that was posed by Commissioner Dasso, whether there are cases brought before the National Courts of Kenya against extractive industries for non-compliance with the legal requirements. We confirm that there has been several cases litigated in our courts on extractive industries. Some of the notable cases that we can highlight is the famous Owino Uhuru case that remains Kenya's most important environmental justice ruling, combining community activism, judicial accountability, and state responsibility. The case demonstrated how courts can enforce the constitutional right to a clean environment and ensure compensation for victims of industrial pollution. In this case, the Supreme Court upheld compensation of Kenya shillings 700 million and ordered cleanup of the polluted areas. Other cases include the Kotek Mining versus Kenya. This was an ICSID arbitration. Others include Joyce Enkan and others versus Tullow Oil. And the rest of the cases we'll highlight in writing to the Commission. In conclusion, we were also requested to provide details on the objectives and some of achievements of the Minorities and Marginalized Affairs Unit. This unit is mandated to coordinate and advocate for inclusion, protection, and empowerment of minorities and marginalized communities across all sectors. This unit, in collaboration with the stakeholders, championed the development of the national policy on ethnic minorities, indigenous and marginalized communities, which was adopted by the Cabinet and launched on 18th December 2025. In addition to the policy, the unit has made tremendous achievements such as championing for recognition and mapping of marginalized communities, capacity building and sensitization of rights, undertaking representation and electoral inclusion discussions with the stakeholders, also undertaking legislative and policy development with a drive to fast-tracking development of the current bill that is under formulation. Thank you, Chairperson.
Honorable Chairperson and distinguished commissioners, in response to some of the questions that were put across by Commissioner Janet, touching on the right to education, information was sought on the percentage of girls in the different education levels, especially in semi-arid, rural areas, and urban informal settlements. In response, we wish to state as follows. Although we do not have disintegrated data on girls in semi-arid, rural areas, and in urban informal settlements, Kenya recorded growth in girls' enrollment across all levels of education in 2024-2025. Pre-primary school enrollment increased to 2.91 million learners in 2024 from 2.89 million learners in 2023, with an increase of 0.5% for girls during the period. Enrollment in primary and junior schools grew by 3.2% to 10.73 million learners, comprising 5.5 million boys and 5.23 million girls. For secondary school, enrollment also rose by 5.2% to 4.32 million learners, with girls accounting for 2.17 million, surpassing boys at 2.15 million. In the technical and vocational education and training sector, enrollment increased by 10.4% to 709 in 2024, 709,000 in 2024. Enrollment in National Polytechnic more than doubled following the elevation of 19 technical and vocational colleges to National Polytechnic status. University enrollment grew by 9.0% to 631,000 students in 2024 to 2025, driven largely by a 13.8% increase in female enrollment to 284,500 students, compared to 5.4% rise in male enrollment to 346,800 students. Public universities accounted for 82.8% of total university enrollment, with undergraduate and postgraduate enrollment rising to 522,900 students. Enrollment in private universities increased by 12.4% to 104,400 students, while the Open University of Kenya nearly doubled its enrollment
from 1,812 to 3,106 students. Another question with regards to the steps that have been taken to protect pregnant students from dropping out of schools and the measures in place to facilitate their reintegration of the young mothers into education. The following concrete steps have been taken to protect pregnant students from dropping out of school. There is flexible schooling for these students. There is transfer option. A student facing intense stigma may transfer to a different school of their choice. Prohibition of expulsion from school has been provided for under the Basic Education Act. Then we have routine checks in schools by the Quality Assurance and Standards officers. And we also have alternative pathways that have been provided, such as vocational training and adult education. Measures in place to facilitate their reintegration include re-entry in early learning and basic education, which mandates unconditional readmission. We also have the implementation of the 100% transition policy that ensures that all learners transit from one level to the other. Then we also have the guidance and counseling, which is a mandatory structured program in school to ensure student safety, academic focus, and behavioral management. We also have the integration of life skill education in the curriculum and programs. There is also the review and alignment of the education sector gender policy of 2025 to address school-related gender-based violence and learner protection. The policy promotes equal access, retention, and completion. Another question that was posed with regards to initiatives or policies in place aimed at encouraging women and girls to choose non-traditional fields of education and careers, particularly the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Such initiatives in place include STEM boot camps of excellence, which are conducted by UNESCO and the Kenya National Commission for UNESCO to train girls in coding, robotics, and AI. Another one is the Center for Mathematics, Science, and Technology in Africa, which is an institution under the Ministry of Education, which has a mentorship and outreach program which targets grade 8 and 9 learners in chemistry, mathematics, biology, physics, and pre-technical studies, with focus on encouraging the girls to pursue the STEM careers. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, distinguished commissioners and delegates. I will respond to the questions raised to the Kenyan delegation regarding health, right to health. Among the questions that were raised was Kenya's commitment to the Abuja Declaration on the budgetary improvement. The other question was on the effect of the U.S. stop order on the health sector in Kenya, and the 95, 2006 to 26 targets, and the HIV segregated data and discrimination. I'll start with the Abuja Declaration. The Abuja Declaration, the government of Kenya reaffirms its commitment once again to the Abuja Declaration, which enjoins African Union member states to allocate at least 15% of their annual budgets to the health sector. The government of Kenya acknowledges that current health budget allocations, while growing in absolute terms, have not consistently met the 15% threshold. In the financial year, however, 2020-2025, the combined national and county government health expenditure represents 8.5% of the total government expenditure. The GOK is undertaking the following measures to progressively increase the health financing. 1, implementation of the Social Health Authority under the Social Health Insurance Act to 2023, which establishes a universal health coverage framework to mobilize additional domestic resources for health, integration of health financing targets into the medium-term expenditure framework, and mobilization of development partner funding to complement domestic resources with a structured transition plan towards greater domestic health. Finally, on that question, the county governments have been encouraged. We have the devolved system in Kenya, been encouraged to integrate their budgets and through the Economic Budget Council to prioritize health allocations in their respective budgets. The government of Kenya commits to progressively increasing the health budget towards the Abuja Declaration threshold and will report on measurable milestones in subsequent periodic periods. The second question was on issues relating to the implementation of the right to health, access to high quality health care, adolescent pregnancy and safe abortion, and maternal and infantile mortality rates. The government of Kenya has implemented a comprehensive package of interventions to realize the right to health as follows. Access to high quality health care. The Social Health Authority has replaced the National Hospital Insurance Fund to provide universal health coverage with a mandate benefit package covering primary, secondary, and tertiary care. Honorable Chair and Commissioner, we are currently, as a country, undertaking one of the most comprehensive reforms in the health sector in Africa. And we want to believe that this will address the issues of health more comprehensively and ensure that the universal health coverage is achieved. Number two, the Primary Health Care Fund, the Afya Bora, allocates resources directly to primary health facilities to enhance service availability at the community level. The government of Kenya has invested in the recruitment of additional health workers, construction and upgrading of health facilities, and supply of essential medicines and medical equipment through the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency Authority, KEMSA. Item number two, adolescent pregnancy. The National Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy provides a framework for comprehensive sexuality education, youth-friendly health services, and access to contraception for adolescents. The teenage pregnancy reduction strategy has been operationalized in counties with the highest burden, including through school re-entry policies that allow pregnant girls and young mothers to continue their education. On unsafe abortion, the government of Kenya provides post-abortion care services in all public health facilities in line with the WHO World Health Organization standards and the reproductive health policy of 2022. Is the government of Kenya considering improving healthcare to remote areas, arid and semi-arid, and informal urban settlements? Yes, the government of Kenya has developed a targeted strategies to address inequitable access to health services in underserved areas as follows. Arid and semi-arid lands. The Kenya ASAL policy and the ASAL development framework prioritizes health infrastructure, investment and service delivery in the 2023 ASAL counties. We have mobile health clinics that have been deployed in partnership with county government to reach nomadic and pastoral communities that cannot access static health facilities. And then the informal urban settlements. Urban health centers have been established in major informal settlements, including Kibera, Mathare, Korogosho, and Mukuru in Nairobi and Kisumu, informal settlements, providing primary care at subsidized rates. The urban wash program that we said is also up and running. A question that came up on the issue of disaggregated data, information about the HIV prevalence evolution that was asked by one of the commissioners. The government of Kenya is pleased to provide the following data on HIV prevalence as at 2026, drawn from the HIV Kenya Estimates Report and the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey supplementary. And as the leader of the delegation said, most of this data will be shared with you when we do our comprehensive write-up in terms of the responses. The national HIV prevalence 2025 estimates among adults aged 15 to 64 years, representing a significant decline from the peak of over 10% recorded in the 1990s. The delegation was also asked to address the issue of the 95 global AIDS targets. I want to inform the honorable commissioners and the chair that the government of Kenya reports the following progress towards the UNAIDS 95 targets of 2026. One, the first 95 people living with HIV who know their status Kenya has achieved 93% of people living with HIV knowing their HIV status. This has been realized through expanded community-based HIV testing, index testing, self-testing programs, and integration of HIV testing into the routine health services, including antenatal care. The second 95 people who know their status and are on treatment. Of those who know their status, 92% are currently on antiretroviral therapy. The government of Kenya has implemented differentiated services delivery models, multi-month ART dispensing, and community ART refill groups to enhance treatment, adherence, and retention. The last third of the 95, those are people on treatment who are virally suppressed. 89% of those on treatment have achieved viral suppression. Ongoing efforts to achieve full viral suppression include enhanced laboratory capacity for viral load testing and intensified adherence counseling. While Kenya has made commendable progress and is on a trajectory to achieve the 95 target, the government acknowledges residual gaps, particularly among key populations, adolescents, and in hard-to-reach areas. The Kenya government, collaboration with development partners, continues to coordinate robust multi-sectoral response to close these gaps before 2030. Finally, the question of the U.S. stop order, the effect of the U.S. stop order. Honorable Commissioners, indeed, we've had a major disruption on the U.S. stop order, as we were, just like most other countries, were relying largely on the support from the U.S. and other donors. So the U.S. stop order has had a significant disruption of services that has impacted health facilities, reported significant service disruptions. Most of the counties faced health service disruptions, highest among them those partner-supported facilities. We've had an impact of stop work order on service delivery, as most programs experience significant disruption and impact on service delivery. Most important, Honorable Chair and Commissioners, what are the mitigation measures are we taking as a country to address the effect of the stop order? One, we are strengthening governance and accountability so that for an integrated HIV and endemic disease response, we have the aspect of strengthening governance and accountability has been stepped up. Secure, sustainable financing. We are establishing as a country mechanism to reduce dependence on external funding, and we've integrated HIV into universal health coverage, which was not the case before. We have enhanced community engagement to ensure inclusivity and community-led participation across the country. And finally, they ensure uninterrupted access to HIV prevention, treatment, and care throughout the transition. I submit, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. Thank you so much.
Honorable Chair and distinguished commissioners, my submission will center around civil and political rights. As many questions were asked by the distinguished commissioners, I will begin with the subparagraph of non-discrimination. The commissioners inquired whether they invited the delegation to whether the question, there have been any prosecution or conviction for discrimination-related cases by the government of Kenya under the period on review. The answer to this is that there is no data on any prosecution or conviction for discrimination. However, most cases go to court as constitutional petitions on violations of the individual rights. On the question of whether there are concrete measures taken by the government of Kenya to address racist or hate speech in the media or internet or in social media, I wish to answer as follows. The government of Kenya has adopted a combination of constitutional, legislative, regulatory, and institutional and enforcement measures taken to address racist speech, hate speech, and online incitement of in the media, on the internet, and across the social platforms. Some of the key measures that have been taken by the government of Kenya is through constitutional and legal framework, to wit the fight against propaganda war, incitement to violence, hate speech, and advocacy of hatred based on discrimination. The government has also enacted several other acts, such as the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act. Besides that, the government of Kenya has also enacted the Media Council Code of Conduct 2025. And in addition to that, the government of Kenya has also enacted the National Cohesion and Integration Act, which criminalizes ethnic contempt, hate speech, and incitement. We have also established as a government the specialized institutions which are specifically mandated to monitor and respond to hate speech. Further, public awareness and preventative measures are also undertaken by the government of Kenya so as to provide civic education campaigns against hate speech, peace messaging during elections. Besides that, investigations and prosecutions have also been enhanced to fight against ethnic incitement, inflammatory online posts. On the subtopic of the right to freedom of conscience, we have been asked to give concrete steps taken by the government of Kenya to ensure that combating terrorism efforts and actions do not affect specific religious groups. In this, our response is that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 guarantees freedom of religion and belief. Equality and freedom from discrimination. Counterterrorism laws such as Prevention of Terrorism Act are applied subject to constitutional protections and safeguards. The government has also established the National Counterterrorism Center, which promotes a multi-agency and multi-stakeholders approach where they involve civil society, religious leaders, and community organizations. Besides that, the government of Kenya has also adopted a national strategy on counterterrorism to counter violent extremism, which basically focuses on the preventative measures of radicalization and non-punishing of religious identity. The government of Kenya also uses community dialogue, education, and awareness programs. We also engage with the religious leaders and institutions. The Commission also inquired whether, on the question of whether they required that we elaborate on reports on excessive use of force, arbitrary detention, torture, cruelty, and inhuman and degrading treatment. In this, the government of Kenya has established an independent policing oversight authority as part of broader police reforms under the Constitution, which which called for civilian oversight of the police. It's aimed at ensuring independent oversight and accountability of the police service over concerns about excessive due process, human rights abuses, among other police misconducts. The independent body during the 2023-2026 received 20,112 complaints, of which 12,732 complaints were successfully resolved, contributing to fair and timely justice. Upon investigations, the files were recommended for further action by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Most of the cases are pending before the courts. IPOA also monitored 514 policing operations and inspected 3,854 police premises and detention facilities, made policy recommendations which improved compliance. There's also a standard operating procedure that has been mooted to govern the working relationship between the Internal Affairs Unit and the National Police Service and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, IPOA, in the investigations and handling of complaints against police officers. On the question of right to participate in government, the Commission inquired whether there are concrete measures taken to avoid any kind of political violence during the next general elections. The government of Kenya, through the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, has put in place several key measures to curb election-related violence. This is done by early prosecutorial guidance to investigators to identify and act on offenses such as incitement, hate speech, and voter intimidation. There is also the strict application of evidential and public interest tests to ensure fair, non-selective prosecutions. We have also deployed specialized and trained prosecutors to handle such election-related offenses. The government of Kenya also, through the National Police Service, has put in the following measures to curb political violence in the oncoming 2027 general elections. In terms of preparedness, the National Police Service recruited 10,000 police constables, which was carried out in November 17, 2025. It is expected that the 9 months training, which is currently ongoing at the training colleges, will strengthen and boost a reasonable requisite number, which will provide security during the forthcoming general elections. In those training institutions, they are also, the recruits are also trained on how to deal with protests. At the same time, the curriculum at the police training centers has been updated to increase the man-hours dedicated to lessons on human rights and humane ways of handling protests. Besides, a committee was also constituted by the Office of the Inspector General to review proposed amendments on the National Police Service Election Security Management Manual 2022 on 31st March 2026. The amendments are proposed to align the election security management with the Constitution of Kenya, emerging electoral jurisprudence, and contemporary election security challenges, including technology-driven elections and human rights-based policing. The National Police Service, also in conjunction with the UNDP, has rolled out what has been christened Station Youth Liaison Officers, SILO curriculum. This curriculum is undertaken at the National Police Leadership Academy in Ngong, in Nairobi, and it's specifically committed to strengthening the trust between law enforcement and young people across the country. This silo curriculum is a transformative training framework designed to equip officers with practical skills in communication, mentorship, peace building, and youth engagement. It was started within Nairobi Command and the neighboring counties, and is poised to continue to other areas. The rollout was done on the 6th of November, 2025. In combating hate speech in both mainstream and social media as a means of avoiding political violence, then the next general elections, the National Police Service, the government of Kenya through the National Police Service has increased the number of police investigators who are seconded to the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, NCIC, to aid in expeditiously investigating hate speeches before forwarding to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, which has the decision to charge. Honorable Chair and distinguished commissioners, on the question under the subtopic of extrajudicial summary and arbitrary executions, there was a question of whether there has been established a panel of experts on compensation and of victims and demonstrations and public protests between the period of 2017 to 2025 to address cases of extrajudicial killings. On this, we wish to answer that the technical responsibility on compensation of victims of demonstrations was transitioned to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which is currently verifying victims of human rights violations, including compiling and verifying a national register of victims to inform on the designs of the reparations framework. Honorable Chair and Commissioners, the Constitution of Kenya guarantees the right to life under Article 26, freedom from torture and cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment under Article 29, and the right to fair trial and due process. The government of Kenya, therefore, has also established an independent policing oversight authority, IPOA, to look into such complaints and investigate death and serious injuries by police. In conclusion, I wish to give a brief chronology of the events that surrounded the question that was asked about Bob Micheni, Longton Jamil, and Aslam Longton. A missing person report was recorded at Kitengela Police Station via occurrence book number 8 of 21st August 2024 by one Frank Njagi. Consequently, the DCI Kitengela opened an inquiry file number 23 of 2024 in respect of Bob Micheni Njagi, who had allegedly gone missing, and they started investigations in earnest. On the 23rd of August 2024, or thereabouts, the Inspector General of Police received ex parte orders of habeas corpus from the High Court Milimani, demanding that himself and 4 other respondents that is included the Director of Public Prosecution, the Attorney General, and the Director of Criminal Investigations, to produce the bodies of Misheni Njagi, Jamil Longton, and Salam Longton, or charge the three in court. This was on petition number E436 of 2024, which was instituted by the Law Society of Kenya and three others. Thereafter, there followed several appearances before the court. Police explained the missing persons inquiry, that the missing persons inquiry file was still pending under investigations. Later on 20th of September 2024, police and the general public learned from the media that Bob Misheni, on one hand, and Jamil Longton and Salam Longton, on the other, had separately resurfaced at Tigoni and Gashie, respectively, and were safely reunited with their families. Distinguished Chair and Commissioners, hitherto, the police have endeavored to have the trio record their statements to enable the conclusion of the case, but to no avail. The matter still remains pending under investigations. And therefore, if it may please you, you may have been aware that the same Bob Njagi was later on arrested in November 2025 in Uganda and was later released. Distinguished Chair and Commissioners, I wish to end there because, as our head of delegation had explained, there's quite a number that we'll have to just put in by way of writing. Thank you. I submit.
Honorable Chair and distinguished commissioners, the delegation was requested to provide information on a wide range of issues on the progress of implementation of the Maputo Protocol, and we hereby respond to the questions as follows. On the request to provide details on the efforts to disseminate and popularize the Maputo Protocol since its ratification, Kenya reports that it has undertaken continuous efforts, including public awareness campaigns, stakeholder engagement, civic education programs, media outreach, national advocacy initiatives, and integration of the protocol's principles into national laws, policies, and institutional frameworks. In March 2026, 80 gender focal persons from various ministries, departments, and agents were trained on gender normative frameworks, including the Maputo Protocol. On adoption of a specific law on gender equality, enshrining the principle of equality and prohibiting all forms of discrimination against women, Kenya reports that the government is actively considering the adoption of a comprehensive legal framework on gender equality. Kenya is thus in the process of developing legislative proposals for consideration of a gender equity and equality bill to give effect to equality, inclusion, and non-discrimination provisions of the Constitution, fulfill international gender commitments, and regulate gender institutions. On whether efforts aiming to combat discrimination against women cover direct and indirect discrimination in the public and private spheres, we submit, yes, all constitutional, legislative, policy, and programmatic measures undertaken by the government of Kenya are designed to safeguard women from all forms of discrimination. These measures are anchored in the equality, dignity, and non-discrimination provisions of the Constitution and bind both public and private actors. On efforts to raise awareness of women's rights, particularly in rural areas, the government of Kenya has strengthened awareness through court users committees, gender-based violence-focused county structures, local language radio programs, 16 days of activism campaigns, and civil society initiatives, among them Groots Kenya, Kelin Kenya, and Rural Women Peace Link, which have further strengthened grassroots women's leadership, legal awareness, access to justice through community organizing, paralegal training, participation in county governance process, and support for alternative justice system. On updates on efforts to strengthen judicial and administrative counseling within the courts for women victims of violence, and measures the state has taken to encourage women to report cases of violence to the courts and to protect them from possible reprisals. We report that measures include the judiciary's sexual and gender-based violence strategy, focusing on victims' rehabilitation, establishment of toll-free hotlines 1195, 999, 911, 116 for anonymous reporting, dedicated gender desks for victims of sexual and gender-based violence in 85% of all police stations in Kenya have been established. We have established gender justice. We have established specialized sexual and gender-based violence courts, survivor identification protection measures. There's a witness protection agency, and a Polycare, which is a one-stop center providing medical, legal, and psychosocial support to victims of sexual and gender-based violence. The government also established a national task force on gender-based violence, including femicide, in 2025, whose recommendations have so far informed ongoing such as establishment of gender-based violence recovery centers, safe houses, and integration of gender-based violence recovery centers into county referral hospitals as centers of excellence. In addition, continuous training and sensitization programs to justice actors are undertaken to promote a survivor-centered approach to sexual and gender-based violence cases. On specific measures, programs, or policies to improve women's access to justice in other areas, in addition to women victims of violence, we submit that the government has strengthened access to justice through legal aid services, alternative dispute resolution, small claims courts, gender justice courts, institutions such as the National Gender and Equality Commission, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, and the Legal Aid Service have expanded legal empowerment, public interest litigation, and legal awareness initiatives targeting women and girls with disabilities, refugees, and other vulnerable groups. On peace and security, Kenya is implementing the third Kenya National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, 2025 to 2029, which strengthens women participation in peace building and conflict resolution. 19 counties have localized the Women, Peace and Security agenda, whilst security institutions continue to implement gender-responsive recruitment, leadership, and GBV training programs. On representation of women in the various levels of leadership, Kenya has made gradual measurable progress in advancing women's representation in elective and appointed positions following the 2022 general elections. Women elected to the National Assembly increased from 23 in 2017 to 29 in 2022, while the number of elected women governors rose from 3 to 7. Women's representation in the National Assembly currently stands at 82 out of 349 members, comprising of elected members, women representatives, and nominated members. Despite this progress, representation, we admit, remains below the constitutional threshold required to fully implement the 2/3 gender principle required under our Constitution. And to address this gap, the government has undertaken several constitutional, legislative, and policy interventions. These include the establishment of a multi-sectoral working group on the realization of the 2/3 principle in 2023, and the recommendations of the National Dialogue Committee on measures to enhance women representation in elective bodies. The multi-sectoral working group has subsequently developed legislative proposals aimed at operationalizing the constitutional requirement on the gender parity, which have been submitted to Parliament, which was submitted to Parliament for consideration in 2025. On the question of whether in Kenya there are any parity quotas or preferential appointment of women measures to accelerate equal representation of women in Parliament, Cabinet, the judiciary, international and diplomatic positions, corporate leadership positions, and other sectors, we submit that Kenya's constitution does not explicitly provide for mechanisms to achieve gender quotas. However, further to the commitments and efforts outlined under paragraphs 180 to 191 of our report, The Senate has proposed the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill number 2 of 2025, that is the Senate Bill number 16, to, among others, operationalize the two-thirds gender principle in Parliament through post-election special seat nominations. On representation of women in the private sector, in particular the managerial and decision-making level, according to the Board Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Report of 2024, by the Kenya Institute of Management in partnership with the Kenya Private Sector Alliance and the Nairobi Securities Exchange. The new faces, the new voices, women's representation on corporate boards increased from 12% in 2012 to 36% in 2022, surpassing the global average of 23%. This growth has been driven by increased focus on corporate governance and gender parity. However, challenges do remain in achieving full gender balance, incorporating younger professionals, and improving representation of ethnic minorities and persons with disabilities. On measures to amend the Sexual Offences Act 2006 and an update on the revision process, the Sexual Offences Amendment Bill 2023 underwent its first reading in July of 2024 and is therefore before the National Assembly Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. Further legislative amendments, proposed legislative amendments on the Sexual Offences Act have been proposed through the introduction of the Sexual Offences Amendment Bill 2025, which further seek to mandate formal judicial processes of sexual crimes, thereby eliminating alternative justice forms, and the same is before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. On whether the existing legislative and institutional framework for combating gender-based violence allow access to justice and meet the medical and psychosocial needs of survivor victims, Kenya reports that sufficient safeguards, as demonstrated under paragraphs 163 of our report, paragraph 202 to 212 of Kenya's report, have proved successful in meeting survivor of victim medical and psychosocial needs. In addition, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions in 2023 commissioned the Rapid Reference Guidelines for investigators and prosecutors in handling sexual and gender-based violence cases to improve investigations and prosecutions. On the forms of rehabilitation and reparations that are available to victims of sexual violence, we refer the Honorable Commissioners to paragraph 208 of Kenya's report and further submits that Kenya has specialized SGBV courts, GBV investigation units under the police, GBV prosecution units under the Office of the DPP, GBV recovery centers, rescue centers, and integrated survivor support services, including counseling, legal assistance, and medical care. The government, in collaboration with civil society and healthcare institutions, has further expanded specialized support through gender-based violence recovery centers and facilities across the country. Institutions include the Gender-Based Violence Recovery Center at Nairobi Women's Hospital, Medicine San Fonte, Lavender House Clinic, Tumaini Girls Rescue Center, and the Kenyatta University Teaching and Referral Hospital in Kenya, which provide free medical, psychological, and social support to survivors. On measures the state has taken to raise awareness of the NAME guidelines among law enforcement officials, magistrates, and other relevant stakeholders, and to ensure their implementation, the government conducts continuous capacity building of duty bearers such as police, the judiciary, the Office of the Director of Prosecutions, community health promoters, and the national government administration officials within the GBV referral pathways focusing on preventive measures, protection, support, accountability, reparation, and rehabilitation. On measures or policies in place to prevent digital violence against women and prosecute reported cases, the government of Kenya has put a wide range of legal, institutional, policy measures to respond to digital violence, and as such, Kenya has introduced the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Amendment Act of 2004, which prohibits against non-consensual publication of intimate images, in addition to the specialized course handling sexual and gender-based violence, In 2023, Kenya launched the Social Media for Peace campaign, which is a coalition with UNESCO to address harmful online content while protecting freedom of expression. On the prevalence of negative traditional cultural practices in the country and the efforts made by the government to combat them, child and forced marriage remain a significant human rights issue despite strong legal prohibitions. However, child marriage prevalence declined from 23% in 2014 to approximately 13% in 2024, but harmful practices such as bidding and widow inheritance persist. Government response includes alternative rites of passage, safe houses, emergency hotlines, and commitments to eliminate FGM and GBV by 2026. On information on the practices of bidding and other harmful practices such as bride price and widowhood rights. Bidding practice involves a warrior buying bids for a girl, indicating that she is taken or reserved, effectively creating a temporary sexual relationship. This practice has serious and harmful consequences, including sexual exploitation and violence, frequently amounting to defilement of minors, and exposes girls to heightened risk of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. It also contributes to school dropout, as affected girls are often withdrawn from education. While traditionally a symbol of marriage, hybrid price in many African societies have become commercialized, treating women as commodities or property. Its negative effects include hybrid prices, often in cash, leading to parents to treat daughters as investments, encouraging early marriage, child marriage, and men may feel that paying hybrid price entitles them to own their wives, increasing the justification for wife beating and abusive marriage. Widowhood rights are designed to cleanse a widow of the husband's spirit, but often involve treatment. Widows are forced to have unprotected sex with a cleanser or are inherited by the husband's relative, placing them at high risk of HIV. Rights can include sleeping with the corpse or shaving the heads, forced public weeping, among other dehumanizing rituals. Lastly, some customary traditions often lead to disinheritance of widows. On what safeguards exist to ensure full respect of women's rights under customary law in Kenya, Kenya has established constitutional, legislative, judicial, and institutional safeguards to ensure that customary law and practices are consistent with the rights and freedoms guaranteed to women under the Constitution and international human rights obligations. The Constitution invalidates any customary law or practice that is inconsistent with it. The Constitution also expressly prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, marital status, culture, or customary practices. Further, our Constitution entitles parties to a marriage to equal rights at the time of marriage, during, and at its dissolution, applying regardless of whether the marriage is under statutory or customary law. Kenya has enacted several laws to protect women's rights in areas traditionally governed by customary practice, and these include the Marriage Act, the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, the Land Act, the Land Registration Act, the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act, which collectively protect women's rights in marriage, inheritance, property ownership, protection from violence, and harmful cultural practices. Registration of customary marriages in Kenya is governed by the Customary Marriage Rules of 2017 under the Marriage Act. Courts have also consistently struck down discriminatory provisions of the Law of Succession Act, and key stricken parts include Section 29, removing the requirement for widows to prove dependency on their wives, on the widowers to prove dependency on their wives, and parts of Section 35 and 36, which previously restricted widows' life interest upon remarriage, and prioritization of also fathers over mothers in succession. In June 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision in the case of Fatuma Athman Aboud Faraj versus Ruth Faith Mawasi, affirming that children born out of wedlock, including girls, both male and female, have equal rights to inherit from their parents' estate, regardless of religious or customary law provisions to the contrary. On what challenges are encountered in enforcing the relevant provisions of the Children Act and the Marriage Act with regard to child marriage. We submit that practical implementation in grassroots communities is often hampered by social, economic, cultural, and structural pressures. Deeply ingrained practices such as female genital mutilation and traditional religious and customary beliefs often normalize or encourage early marriage, creating resistance to legal intervention. Poverty further exacerbates the situation, with households resorting to early marriage to alleviate economic pressures. On information on prosecutions, convictions for cases of child marriage, the period under review, during the reporting period, 323 child marriage-related cases were reported. 18 were convicted on a plea of guilty, 91 were convicted on a full trial, 72 were acquitted, 71 were withdrawn, and 71 are still live in court. On whether the state is aware of the Commission's General Observation number 6 on the Maputo Protocol, the right to property in legal and separation of divorce, I think I have already submitted to that. On the percentage of girls in the different educational levels in the secondary and higher education, especially in semi-arid, rural areas and urban informal settlements, commissioners, allow me not to belabor the issue as the same has been responded to by my colleague Delegate Ms. Siranga. On early pregnancy leading to school dropouts, concrete steps that have been taken to protect pregnant girls by the government of Kenya. These include flexible schooling, transfer options, prohibition of expulsion from school, routine checks in schools by quality assurance, guidance and counseling, and alternative pathways provided such as vocational training and adult education. On initiatives or public policies aimed at encouraging women to choose non-traditional fields of education careers, I wish to not belabor this as it has been submitted by my colleague Delegate Ms. Siranga. On inclusive adult literacy programs targeted at women, including women with disabilities, older women, and rural women, this has also been submitted by my colleague Delegate Ms. Siranga. On whether termination of pregnancy or medical abortion in Kenya, in cases of sexual assault, rape, and incest is permitted in Kenya, we submit that under the Constitution, termination of pregnancy is generally prohibited. However, the Constitution provides specific exemptions pursuant to Article 26(4). Abortion is permitted where, in the opinion of a trained health professional, there is need for emergency treatment or where the life or health of the mother is in danger. The term health has been interpreted by the courts to include physical, mental, and psychological health. On concrete measures taken to combat maternal mortality in the state party, allow me to rely on the submissions made by my colleague Delegate Mr. Atambo. On the existence of awareness-raising campaigns on sexual and reproductive rights in Kenya, the GOK actively conducts conducts awareness-raising campaigns on sexual reproductive health, and currently there are 5 campaigns, including Triple Threat Campaign, a health project, Flow with Pride, Chagua Mkononi, and Every Woman, Every Newborn, Everywhere campaign, all of 2024-2025. On the main priorities of the National Reproductive Health Policy of 2022 to 2032, the National Reproductive Health Policy is a commitment of the government of Kenya to all persons, and its key priorities include but are not limited to reducing maternal, perinatal, and neonatal morbidity and mortality, reducing unmet family needs, reducing the burden of reproductive tract infections, and improving access to and quality RTIs, among other services. On the concrete measures currently implemented by the government of Kenya in the framework of National Action Plan for Peace and Security currently enforced in Kenya in accordance with United Nations Resolution Council 1325, Commissioners, this has been sufficiently responded and demonstrated under paragraph 282 and 287 of our report. Allow me to finish on the existence of any restrictions on women's inheritance rights in Kenya, particularly those that may be based on customary law. Although discriminatory and customary practices persist, constitutional and judicial protections guarantee women's rights, as I have earlier submitted. On information on the situation of female prisoners and protection afforded to them, in particular pregnant women and nursing mothers, Kenya maintains a gender-responsive correctional system that ensures separation and appropriate treatment of female offenders. Within these facilities, specialized wards are provided for pregnant inmates, lactating mothers, and elderly prisoners. This classification framework ensures tailored care and protection for vulnerable categories. The Kenya Prison Service, in collaboration with various strategic partners, also provides facilities for women's specific hygienic needs. Selected institutions such as the Langata Women's Prison and Shimolatewa Women's Prisons have maternity wings to support maternal care with prison settings. Mothers are permitted to live with their children until the age of 4 years. During this period, the prison takes care of the children, and they are provided with age-appropriate nutrition to support their healthy growth. Daycare facilities are available in some prisons to support childcare while mothers engage in their daily duties in the prison. Honorable Commissioners, on data on prosecutions on convictions for widow cleansing during the period under review, unfortunately, as much as the government remains committed to the protection of women, we have not disintegrated ascertainable data on prosecutions and convictions for widow cleansing during the period under review. And on the last question that we managed to register on any other challenges or gaps in the implementation of the rights of protected groups of women and efforts being made to overcome them, we submit that the government of Kenya has made significant progress in constitutional, legislative and development of policies and building institutions to promote gender equality and the protection of women and girls. However, practical impact of legal policy frameworks on girls and women's lives is often overshadowed by social, cultural, and economic norms, deep-rooted cultural and societal norms, early and forced marriages, FGM, GBV, food security, limited access to finance, technology, underrepresentation in decision-making, and limited access to essential services often hamper efforts to fully realize women's rights. While acknowledging the existing challenges, the government remains steadfast in strengthening legal policy, institutional and programmatic interventions aimed at advancing gender equality, eliminating all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, and ensuring inclusive access to justice, education, health, leadership, and socio-economic opportunities. Kenya further reiterates its commitment to continuing engagement with the African Commission, civil society, development partners, and all stakeholders in order to progressively realize substantive equality and uphold the dignity and rights of all women and girls in Kenya. Thank you.
Chairperson and honorable commissioners, my delegation made every attempt to pay careful attention to the questions, comments, and observations made by the Commission. However much we have tried to give responses, we also note that with the time allocated, there could be a question or two that we may still not have adequately addressed. We undertake, on behalf of the Republic of Kenya, to supply the information required of those questions in written format. As we conclude, Chairperson, honorable commissioners, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity on behalf of the Republic of Kenya and my delegation to express our deep gratitude for the cordial, candid, and constructive, positive dialogue that we've had for the last 2 days. I thank you for the positive spirit extended by the honorable commissioners to my delegation. And I in particular thank you, Honorable Chairperson, for the excellent way in which you have stewarded this dialogue. I also wish to take the opportunity to thank the government of the Republic of Gambia and her people for the hospitality that it has extended to us since we arrived in Gambia, and the manner in which it has made our stay here most enjoyable and comfortable. Chairperson and commissioners, we will indeed consider all the questions, comments, and observations in the context of the structures and conditions in our country and provide written responses in keeping with the procedures of the Commission. This delegation would also wish to thank the Executive Secretary and the Secretariat for the excellent support accorded to my delegation during the entire period of reporting since submission of our report in December 2025 to this August session. As we mentioned in the opening, Nairobi reminisces and fondly remembers the inauguration of the Charter in June 1981. And it also comes, therefore, as a moment of reflection for this delegation as we make the submission of the 14th report on the Charter and the second report on the Maputo Protocol. It may have been an occasion for this to happen in Nairobi. Be that as it may, we are in Banjul, and we congratulate the Commission on the occasion of the 40th celebration of the Charter. We look forward, perhaps, on the 50th or on the 60th, that the report that shall be read by the delegation that shall be sent by the Republic of Kenya shall be in Nairobi. We continue to extend our firm belief in the ethos and values of the Charter. We will continue to extend our support and collaboration with the Commission as it seeks to achieve the spirit and ideals that make us African, the human and people's rights for our people, for our countries. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Head of the Delegation, Monsieur Laurence Ngigi. We do appreciate the time you took to respond to all the questions that we have raised as part of this constructive conversation that we have had with you since yesterday. I would, at this juncture, I would not actually make any comment on the merits of your report, but I can say that given the information contained therein, we do understand that this was work done with utmost seriousness and professionalism. Like my colleague said yesterday, Commissioner Janet Njai, that you have adhered to the guidelines that govern the presentations of state reports before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. You should also be congratulated for that. We also appreciate the composition of your delegation. Gender parity has been respected. And this indeed is very important for the Commission. With respect to the commemoration, the Commission does remember that the Charter was born in Nairobi in 1981, and we have continued to celebrate this because in the session of October, which is quite obvious would take place in Senegal, we will commemorate the 48th anniversary of the entry into force. So please be our ambassador to popularize the 48th anniversary of the Charter, which, as I said, was born in Kenya. I would now share with you the follow-up to your presentation. The procedure for the consideration of the report continues. We have taken due note that written responses will be sent to us to supplement your response. And during our next session in private, we will look at the content of the report, and we will in due course communicate our final observations and the recommendations that we deem necessary. I also appreciate the fact that you have understood the spirit behind this exercise. This is a constructive conversation which aims at implementing the implementation of the laws enshrined in this Charter. It is because you have understood this that you have had a very constructive discussion with us. So before closing finally this portion, we will give the floor to Honorable Solomon Airi Derso, the country commissioner, for his conclusive remarks, and thereafter you are kindly requested to come and we will have a group.
Thank you very much, Chair. A very good morning to the distinguished delegation of Kenya and distinguished states delegates, NHRIs and civil society organizations and interpreters. Chair, you have said literally everything that I planned to say. All that I wish to do is really echo with deep appreciation my delight about the opportunity that this presentation of the report afforded us to engage in candid and constructive exchange on the state of human and people's rights and the efforts towards compliance with the standards set in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Indeed, the purpose of this exercise, as you rightly pointed out and echoed by the Chair, is to enable us to have first-hand and direct engagement between us as the organ tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the Charter and you as the state party to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights that took legal obligation under the Charter to strive towards the realization of the promise contained in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And indeed, our exchange is reflective of the aspirations that we all have, and it's not meant to be seen as directed at or against anyone. And whatever it is that this commission does, as it sometimes is basically not just for us as members of the commission, not just for citizens, and you, on your own right, even if you are government officials, are also entitled to human and people's rights. So the work that we do covers everyone in good and in bad times, whether they're in office and when they leave office, importantly as well. And therefore, all that I have to say is that I look forward to your continued collaboration with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and to the receipt also of the complete, full written submission that would complement what you have extensively covered in your intervention already. I wish to sincerely thank each and every one of the members of the delegation for the work that has been done very well, and also to the head of delegation for the constructive and kind and candid engagement that we continue to have. And personally, I look forward to a written authorization of the conduct of a promotion mission by the African Commission in a not so distant future. And I wish you safe travels back to beautiful Nairobi. Thank you very much again. Thank you, Chair.
Please allow me to make concluding remarks. The Commission has taken due note of the presentation of your report, and we submit that the state of Kenya has adhered to its obligation to present the report in accordance with Article 62 of the Charter, and that the final observations will be sent to you in line with the rules of procedure of the Commission. So I close this item, and please come and join us for the group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now open up item number 4 of our agenda on the human rights situation in Africa. We have received requests for the floor from the state parties and the civil society organization. Let me start with the states, and I will call upon the delegate from Zimbabwe to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, for affording Zimbabwe the opportunity to exercise its right to reply. Honorable Chairperson, the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights and some other NGOs submitted and averred that civic space in Zimbabwe continues to worsen and that my government continues to use the criminal prosecution and persecution to repress human rights defenders. Allow me, Honorable Chairperson, to put the record straight on behalf of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Chairperson, a distinction must be made between arrests involving criminal allegations and purported abduction or repressions of civic activities. In any jurisdiction, due process does not discriminate based on one's status or title. Any individual who contravenes the law must appear before the courts to answer any allegations in accordance with the legal procedures. All Zimbabwean citizens remain equal before the law, and no one is immune from arrest or prosecution. Honorable Chairperson, regarding Zimbabwe's PVO Amendment Act, we refer to the comprehensive statements made and submitted earlier on similar issues. I wish to reiterate that this law is a necessary measure aimed at improving the administration, accountability, and transparency of PVOs, in particular those that receive public funds. As a member of the East and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group for combating money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism, and proliferation, Zimbabwe has the obligation to adhere to the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. The push for greater transparency stems from the consent and recommendations highlighting that Zimbabwe had deficiencies relating to terrorist financing, among other issues. Hence, Honorable Chair, this was a non-compliant issue with recommendation number 8 of the FAFT recommendations. Given this context, Zimbabwe's PVO Amendment Act does not in any way encroach upon the right to freedom of association of private voluntary organizations. Rather, it introduces measures intended to enhance transparency and accountability. Furthermore, the PVO Act does not deprive individuals of their right to participate in politics. However, it confines PVOs to the objectives for which they were established, namely charitable and developmental work rather than political activities. It must further be noted that the Constitutional Court of Zimbabwe affirmed the constitutional validity of the provision of the PVO Act following several lawsuits seeking the striking down of the amendment to the Act. In conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, our commitment to protect all Zimbabweans remains absolute, and we welcome continued and constructive engagement with all stakeholders to achieve the full enjoyment of fundamental human rights by all. I thank you, Honorable Chair and Commissioners.
Thank you, distinguished delegate. The Commissioner has taken due note of your statement and the right to reply. I'd like to give the floor now to Her Excellency Rebecca Otengo, Ambassador of Uganda to the African Union.
Thank you, Chair, for giving us the opportunity once again. Briefly, I would just like to indicate to the Commission that this delegation composes of 4 ladies, 4 gentlemen, and 8 ladies, with me as the head of delegation. We are doing well on the girl-child education. Your Excellency, Chair, Uganda successfully concluded its general elections in the period between January and February 2026 in a peaceful and orderly manner and in accordance with the prevailing law of our country. Government continues to emphasize to its citizens the importance of the politics of interest rather than the politics of identity. Within the multi-party dispensation, 12 political parties took part in the general elections and at various positions, beginning from the presidential, parliamentary, local level, and also including elections of special interest groups. These are the youth, the women, persons with disabilities, the workers, and the elderly. I would like to indicate that most probably Uganda is now the only country in the world that elects representatives of the elderly, and there are 5 in the parliament and all other levels. Your Excellency, at the presidential level, His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of the National Resistance Movement won with a decisive victory of 71.65, beating other 7 presidential contestants. The president was inaugurated on 12 May 2026, and we appreciate the presence of the chair of the African Union Commission, the heads of state and government, former heads of state and government, the high-level delegation from different member states, the UN, the AUC, and the international organizations. We also appreciate the messages of goodwill and congratulations extended by the African Union leadership and member states following the elections. As a democratic party, a democratic country, we have reaffirmed our commitment to constitutionalism, political stability, national unity, and prosperity. Your Excellency Chair, government invited several international and local elections observer missions to observe the 2026 Uganda general elections, and this was to promote transparency, accountability, and credibility in the electoral process of our country. The international election observers that took place included the African Union, IGAD, COMESA, EU, East African Community, COMESA, again, International Conference of Great Lakes Region, and the Commonwealth. The local election observer mission included AU, IGAD, COMESA, also together. And these are the people who gave us commendation on how Uganda took an effort in taking regular elections and delivering the election in a calm and peaceful environment. Government continues to strengthen responsibility of governance, accountability, and administration of justice, and undertakes initiatives aimed at improving the justice and enhancing the capacity of human rights institutions and promoting civic awareness of its citizens. The court services has now expanded to 78.41 nationwide through additional courts, high courts, and court of appeal circuits, new magistrates courts, and this has improved efficiency to almost a half, clearing the backlog from 48% to 24.2%. The operational capacity of the Human Rights Commission has been strengthened through increased financial investment. In this midterm expenditure framework, the allocation has improved to about $3.393 million. Your Excellency Chair, Uganda recognizes that human rights are interconnected and indivisible. And therefore, the promotion of human rights cannot be separated from the socio-economic transformation. We therefore continue to pursue policies and programs that aims at democratic governments and also expanding socio-economic opportunities and enhancing the welfare and dignity of our people. Through community-based economic intervention, amongst them the parish development model, EMIOGA, and youth fund, women fund, and grants to the elderly, Uganda is promoting financial inclusion and enterprise development. We are contributing to the access to credit, job creation, economic resilience, and improve livelihood amongst the vulnerable population. In the past 4 years, Uganda has economically impacted 3.3 million households through the parish development model, and we have invested over $1 billion US. The poverty rate has gone to half from 24% in 2011 to 16% in 2024. And the reduction on people on subsistence economy has also gone by half, from 69% in 2011 to 33% in 2024. And this indicates a progress in transition to money economy. Uganda made progress in accessing education to our children, health services, and digital innovation as part of the broader effort to ensure inclusive and sustainable development. Those who can now walk only 5 kilometers radius to health facilities has improved from 80% in 2019 and now to 91%. Uganda is concerning the AU theme of the year on sustainable water availability and safe water systems. Uganda recognizes the impact of clean drinking water and sanitation on improving health and quality of life. To this end, Uganda has invested on access to water and improving sanitation in the country. This investment is towards construction of water supply and sanitation, and this includes piped water, solar-powered water and sanitation system, and also gravity flow schemes across the country. In 2024, national census results indicated that 81.1% of households in Uganda can now access clean and safe water. Uganda remains committed to protection of persons in vulnerable situations, including the refugees, older persons, women and children, persons with disability, and we are undertaking targeted initiatives to improve the rights of these people. Uganda continues to pursue one of the most progressive refugee policy globally, and now we are providing homes to 1.9 million refugees that we host in our country. We allow them to access land, education, health care, and opportunities for socioeconomic integration. Your Excellency Chair, Uganda recognizes that African solidarity and collective efforts and action in addressing emerging challenges, including climate change, youth unemployment, food insecurity, terrorism, cyber threats, and transnational crimes cannot be done alone. We need a continental effort to get this response right. Allow us to join other delegations in recognizing and celebrating of the 45th anniversary of the adoption of the 40th anniversary of coming into force of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. We recognize the importance of the Charter in facilitating and enhancing member states' capacity to promote, protect, and monitor implementation of human rights in the continent. Uganda reaffirms its commitment to the principle and aspiration enshrined in the Charter and continues to undertake the measures in the full implementation. In conclusion, Chair, Uganda reaffirms its readiness to continue engaging constructively with the African Commission and all stakeholders, and we will make an undertaking here that probably by the end of the year, we will bring our periodic report that currently is under heavy work to make it implementable before you. Thank you, Chair, and once again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, distinguished Ambassador. The Commissioner has taken due note of your statement and is delighted of the announcement made on the next presentation of your state report under Article 60 of the Charter. This brings an end to the request for the floor by state parties. I can't see any further requests, and now I'm going to invite civil society organizations. Center for Human Rights, Sebelo Commission. Observer status number 116. Center for Human Rights, you have the floor, please.
The Center for Human Rights, Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria, wishes to draw the attention of the Commission to the growing practice of third country deportations to African states by the United States and its implications on human rights on the continent. The Center for Human Rights expresses grave concern over the increasing use of third country deportations, whereby individuals, including asylum seekers and undocumented migrants, are removed to African countries with which they have no prior connection and to which they have not consented. These arrangements reportedly involving countries such as Rwanda, Ghana, Cameroon, Eswatini, South Sudan, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Equatorial Guinea form part of a broader migration externalization policies. These deportations are often facilitated through opaque bilateral arrangements with limited public information on their terms and safeguards. The Center for Human Rights is particularly concerned about the significant power imbalances underpinning these agreements, which may involve financial incentives, development assistance, or diplomatic pressure. This raises serious questions about whether such arrangements reflect free and informed consent by receiving states. The Center for Human Rights notes that these individuals subjected to these transfers are frequently denied basic procedural safeguards, including lack of notice prior to removal, absence of informed consent, limited or access to legal representation, inability to challenge removal or present protection claims. Upon arrival, deportees often face arbitrary or prolonged detention, lack of legal status or documentation, limited access to health care, food and basic services, risk of onward refoulement, exposure to inhuman and degrading treatment. These conditions place individuals in situations of legal and social limbo, often without having committed any crime in the receiving state. The Center for Human Rights admits that these practices raise serious concerns under the African Charter, including violations of Article 5, Article 6, Article 12, and Article 18 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Additionally, the transfers of these individuals to countries where they lack cultural, linguistic, and social ties undermines their ability to participate in cultural life and maintain identity. These practices reflect a wider trend of externalization of migration control, shifting responsibility for migrants and asylum seekers to third countries, often with weaker protection systems. This risks transforming African states into sites of containment, undermining both individual rights and integrity of the regional human rights system. In light of the above, the Center for Human Rights urges the African Commission to call on members to refrain from entering and implementing third country deportation arrangements without adequate safeguards. It urges states to uphold the principle of non-refoulement. encourage states and accountability in migration agreements, develop regional guidelines on migration externalization, and ensure protection against arbitrary detention and inhuman treatment. The Center for Human Rights thanks the Commission for its attention.
Thank you very much for your statement. I'll invite Afrobarometer. Afrobarometer, you have the floor, please.
Yes, Afrobarometer is honored to address the Commission on behalf of African citizens whose voices we have documented for more than 25 years. In a year, the African Union has declared the Year of Water Sustainability. No issues deserves more urgent attention than the right to safe water and sanitation, a right denied to hundreds of millions of Africans. Access to safe water is not a development aspiration, it is a fundamental human right affirmed in Article 16 of the African Charter. Yet our data reveal a continent where this right is systematically unfulfilled. Our round 10 surveys, where 50,961 face-to-face interviews were conducted across 38 countries in 2024 and 2025, revealed that 57% of Africans went without enough clean water at least once in the past year. 1 in 4 experienced this many times or always. Water supply is citizens' third most important problem, ahead of it only health and unemployment. Only 52% of surveyed communities have piped water system. This falls below 25% in Angola, Guinea, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Nearly half of all Africans, 48%, must leave their compound to reach their main water source. Just 25% of communities have a sewage system. 8% of citizens have no toilet or latrine at all. The crisis falls hardest on those already most vulnerable. Rural residents are far more likely to experience shortages, far less likely to have piped water than urban citizens. Among the poorest Africans, 92% report going without clean water in the past year. Sewage infrastructure is almost entirely absent from rural areas, 8% coverage versus 41% in the cities. The Commission has affirmed rights must be realized without discrimination. Our data shows structural discrimination embedded in service delivery. The situation is worsening. Tracking 28 countries since 2014 to 2015, the share reporting water shortages has grown from 46% to 56%, with frequent shortages rising from 19% to 24%. Climate change is accelerating this. 1 in 3 Africans, 34%, have already had to reduce consumption or change water sources due to shifting weather. In Tunisia and Guinea, this exceeds 50%. The climate crisis is not coming for tens of millions of Africans, it has arrived. Only 39% of citizens give their government a passing mark on water and sanitation. Majorities in 28 of 38 countries say their government is performing badly, including 90% in Congo-Brazzaville and 87% in Nigeria. Over a decade, satisfaction has not improved overall. While Senegal, Tanzania, and Mali have shown gains, Namibia has fallen 32%, South Africa 25 points. This represents a profound accountability deficit. The covenant between citizens and state is broken. Afrobarometer is respectfully calls upon this Commission to formally affirm access to safe water and sanitation as a justifiable right under the African Charter with the clear accountability mechanism for state parties. Prioritize the most marginalized rural communities, women and girls, and those in extreme poverty, ensuring aggregate figures do not obscure the inequalities our data document. Integrate climate resilience into the human rights framework for water, recognizing climate change as a driver of rights violations already underway. Hold state parties accountable to Agenda 2063, the Africa Water Vision, and the SDGs by embedding water benchmarks in concluding observations and special mechanisms. Honorable Commissioners, political declarations and final pledges must be measured against lived experience. The World Bank's 1.58 billion commitment to water access in East and Southern Africa is welcome, but our data speak clearly. The people of Africa want water, want safe water. They're asking their governments to act, and they are watching. Afrobarometer stands ready to support the Commission with data and the authentic voices of African citizens, guided by our founding principles. Good governance must be grounded in what the people themselves say. Let the people have a say. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Afrobarometer.
Very much, Afrobarometer. And now I'd like to invite Center for Minority Rights Development, Observer Status number 249.
Honorable Chairperson, Vice Chairperson, and members of the African Commission, all protocols observed. We welcome the opportunity to engage with the Commission during its 87th ordinary session. We would like to draw the attention of this Commission to a deeply alarming pattern of violations affecting indigenous peoples across the African continent. The issues we raise today are not isolated incidents. They reflect a systemic crisis defined by land dispossession, attacks on indigenous defenders, criminalization of legitimate advocacy, and reprisals against those who stand up for their ancestral lands, livelihoods, and dignity. In respect to Kenya, we have documented the ongoing compulsory acquisition of titled indigenous community land in Turkana under Gazette Notice number 14647 of 2025 for the expansion of oil exploitation by Tullow Oil, now Gulf Energies, activities without genuine, free, prior, and informed consent. These actions undermine the collective rights of indigenous communities over their lands, contrary to Articles 14, 21, and 22 of the African Charter. Oil extraction has led to the contamination of water sources, destruction of pastoralist livelihoods, and misappropriation of compensation funds paid to the county government. Defenders seeking accountability face threats and intimidation. In June 2025, the Turkana Indigenous Peoples Action for Development filed a case against Turkana County Government, Tullow Oil, and the National Land Commission. An act of courage we commend. This situation has attracted the attention of the UN Special Procedures mandate holders, who have addressed communications to both the Government of Kenya and to Tullow Oil, expressing concerns about the absence of genuine FPIC, environmental harm, and threats against defenders. Additionally, the Ogiek of Kenya's Mau Forest continue to face landlessness despite landmark African Court judgment in 2017 and 2022, ordering land titling reparations and formal recognition. Over 700 Ogiek were forcefully evicted in November 2023, their homes burned, their livestock confiscated. These judgments must be implemented without further delay. In Tanzania, the Maasai of Ngorongoro and Loliondo face systemic displacement linked to safari tourism, trophy hunting, and extractive industries in defiance of the African Court of Justice 2018 orders to cease all evictions. Maasai leaders and defenders have been arrested and prosecuted under fabricated charges for peacefully defending their lands. The UN SAD has issued an urgent action communication calling on Tanzania to halt all planned relocations immediately. We also note with concern the expansion of graphite and transition mineral mining on indigenous lands without FPIC, contributing to pollution, land grabbing, and barriers to remedy. We stand in solidarity with the Maasai of Tanzania in their rejection of the recent Commissioner's recommendation for further evictions from their ancestral lands. We remain deeply concerned by the situation in Cameroon, where an indigenous rights defender was targeted, seriously injured, and his home destroyed, and his wife sexually violated in retaliation for defending his community's land. The Baka and the Bagieli communities face dispossession through protected areas declared without their consultation, with traditional livelihoods criminalized and defenders facing prosecution and violence. Impunity for perpetrators remains the norm. For the case in the DRC, we call the Commission's attention to the lack of full implementation of the 19 recommendation in its landmark 2022 ruling, which found that the forced evictions of the Batwa from Kahuzi-Biega National Park violated the rights under the African Charter. Beyond Kahuzi-Biega, thousands of indigenous peoples across North Kivu and Ituri have been killed and displaced by armed groups, including M23, exploiting natural resources on indigenous lands as a method of interest. We are additionally deeply concerned by the escalating sexual and gender-based violence against Indigenous women and girls in conflict-affected areas. These violations reflect the historical and contemporary discrimination intensified by forced displacement, conservation-related evictions, and the criminalization of Indigenous livelihoods. We urge the Commission to call on Kenya to halt compulsory acquisition of Turkana lands without FPIC and implement the African Court judgment in the Ogiek case without further delay. Call on Tanzania to comply on the EACJ orders, implement SAD's recommendation, drop all charges against Maasai defenders, and ensure no mining proceeds on Indigenous lands without genuine FPIC. Call on Cameroon to investigate the attacks on Indigenous defenders, ensure accountability and recognize the Indigenous people's rights to the ancestral territories, press the DRC to implement the Batwa ruling, protect Indigenous communities in conflict-affected areas, including Indigenous women's sexual and reproductive health rights, and ensure all extractive activities on Indigenous lands require genuine FPIC. We commend the Commission for advancing the draft African Declaration on the promotion of the role of human and people's rights defenders and call for its swift adoption with explicit provisions covering Indigenous land and human rights defenders. We also congratulate the Commission for conducting the February 2026 validation workshop for the draft study on Indigenous populations and communities in Africa and urge for its early adoption. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your statement. I'd now like to invite Article 19, Observer Status number 66. Article 19.
Honorable Commissioners, State Delegates, distinguished participants. This statement is issued by the Africa Editors Forum on behalf of Article 19, Eastern Africa, pursuant to Article 9 of the Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights and the mandate of the African Commission to promote and protect freedom of expression, access to information, media freedom, civic participation, and the broader enjoyment of rights across the continent. First and foremost, Honorable Chairperson, we'd wish to acknowledge the Kenya State Report, noting the progress reported therein, and also taking on the welcome to comment and explore areas for further reinforcement. We acknowledge Kenya's progressive constitutional framework, including protections under Articles 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37 of the Constitution of Kenya, which guarantee freedom of expression, media freedom, access to information, freedom of association, and peaceful assembly. These protections remain among the strongest on the continent, and are of particular note now that we consider also the digital futures of Africa. However, Article 19 remains deeply concerned by significant deterioration of civic space, media freedom, digital rights, and freedom of expression in Kenya between 2025 and 2026. Honorable Chairperson, this deterioration must be understood not only as a national concern, but also as part of the wider continental struggle to protect Africa's democratic and digital public sphere. Across Africa, digital technologies have become central to journalism, central to civic participation, central to protest organization, central to public accountability, central to access to information, and central to democratic engagement. Yes, yet these same spaces are increasingly being constrained through online surveillance, misuse of cybercrime laws, internet and platform restrictions, digital harassment, platform opacity, disinformation, and state actions that criminalize legitimate online expression. Kenya's situation therefore raises concerns not only for constitutionalism at home, but also for Africa's collective commitment to a free, open, secure, inclusive, and rights-respecting digital future. Honorable Commissioners,
The period under review has been characterized by violent repression of protests, attacks against journalists, restrictions on live media coverage, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrests, and increasing criminalization of online expression. According to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, during the June 25th, 2025 demonstrations alone, at least 19 people were killed, 531 were injured, 15 forcibly disappeared, and 179 arrested. During the Sabasaba demonstration of 7th July 2025, KNCHR documented an additional 31 deaths, 107 injuries, 532 arrests, and 2 enforced disappearances. These developments reflect a disturbing pattern of excessive use of force and shrinking civic space in Kenya. We welcome the African Commission's own statement of the June 29, 2025, condemning the use of live ammunition against peaceful protesters and expressing concern regarding restrictions imposed on media houses covering demonstrations. Honorable Commissioners, Article 19 is particularly alarmed by increasing attacks against journalists, bloggers, online commentators, digital activists, and human rights defenders. The Media Council of Kenya documented at least 130 press freedom violations in its recent monitoring report, including assaults, threats, arbitrary arrests, confiscation of equipment, online harassment, and denial of access while journalists covered protests and governance issues. These violations do not only endanger journalists, they deny citizens the information they need to participate meaningfully in public life. We also are concerned by the increasing reliance on the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act to target critics, target bloggers, online activists, and social media commentators. Since 2025, individuals have continued to face arrests and prosecutions under provisions criminalizing false publication, cyber harassment, and misuse of digital platforms. We note the positive development in which the Kenyan Court of Appeal declared sections 22 and 23 of the Act, which criminalized false or misleading information unconstitutional, finding them overly broad and incompatible with constitutional protections of freedom of expression. However, Article 19 remains concerned that subsequent amendments adopted in 2025 continue to expand state powers in ways that risk enabling unlawful surveillance, arbitrary enforcement, censorship, and criminalization of legitimate online speech. Cybercrime and digital governance laws must not become instruments of suppressing dissent, investigative journalism, satire, whistleblowing, public interest scrutiny, or democratic participation. Honorable Commissioners, the protection of digital rights is now inseparable from the protection of human rights in Africa. The internet and digital platforms are indispensable to the enjoyment of rights protected under the African Charter, including freedom of expression, access to information, association, assembly, privacy, political participation, and the right to receive and impart information. For this reason, responses to this
Please conclude, please. Time is up.
As I conclude, Honorable Chairperson, Article 19 therefore urges the Government of Kenya to first ensure prompt, independent, transparent, and effective investigations into all killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrest, torture, and violations of committed. Secondly, end the use of excessive force against protesters. Third, repeal and amend provisions of the Computer and Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. And finally, fourth, protect journalists, bloggers, online commentators, digital activists, and human rights defenders. I thank you.
The floor is now to Uganda.
Thank you, Chair. This delegation takes the floor in response to the concern raised by an NGO regarding the country's bilateral agreement with U.S. on the third country nationals. Your Excellency, Chair, we have this to say in response. The governments of Uganda and the United States of America signed an agreement for the cooperation in examination of protection rights in July 2025. The agreement conforms to Uganda's national laws and international obligation. It is in this respect of the third country nationals or the individuals who are neither Ugandans or from the US but of African origin, who may not be granted asylum in US and are reluctant to and have concerns about returning to their countries of origin. This safe third country agreement takes into account both the government's international obligation, including the principle of non-refoulement, that guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they would face torture, cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, which applies to all the migrants irrespective of their migration status. It is therefore on this basis that the government of Uganda, having been considered as a third country, safe third country, reviewed and accepted a proposal by the government of the United States to cooperate in the examination of the protection request of individuals who may be removed from the USA. For emphasis, these individuals are neither Ugandans nor Americans, but of African origin. Pursuant to this bilateral agreement, a group of 8 individuals whose cases had been reviewed and approved by the US immigration judge arrived and was received in Uganda from the US on 1st April 2026, and their protection requests will be handled. Due to privacy and reasons that is beyond us here, their details may not be disclosed. Would like to make a commitment that Uganda continues to uphold its long-standing commitment to providing sanctuary to persons who need it and ensuring that they are treated with dignity. This is brought forth by our own history. If we were not received by others during Amin's time, a country called Uganda would not be in existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The statement is noted. I'll give the floor to the Ambassador of Eswatini to the African Union.
IT, can you assist, please?
Thank you. Honorable Chair, distinguished commissioners, Your Excellencies, and fellow participants, I greet you all this morning, and I thank the Chair for affording us the opportunity to respond to what has just been said, not only by the NGO today, but even, I understand, even the Human Rights Watch has said something about the third country deportees. Honorable Commissioners, it is indeed the Kingdom of Eswatini did indeed enter into a bilateral agreement with the government of the United States of America. However, what we want to point out now is that it's a bit difficult for us to make an adequate and sufficient response because the issue that is brought here is before courts in the Kingdom of Eswatini, and has also been brought to this honorable commission. But we can, as a fact, make it known that it's not true that we are holding these deportees as prisoners. And it is indeed true that we are currently holding bilateral talks with their respective countries, and some have already been returned to their countries in a very peaceful and mutually agreed agreement. That's all what I can say. And for the other allegations that are made, even in October, we did respond and gave a clear direction as to what is happening. So maybe in October, after due consultations, we will have proper responses. I thank you very much, Chair. And
thank you so much. The Vice Chair will now take over the chairing of the session. I need to withdraw for some other commitments. Thank you. It is a pleasure to grant the floor to the Honorable Representative of the Delegation of Tanzania for the right of response.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to respond on two issues. On the first issue, concerning water. Great strides have made in enhancing access to water with 80% coverage in rural areas and 92% coverage in urban areas. This has enabled increased sanitation service through initiatives such as the Water Sector Development Program of 2022 to 2026 and the National Behavioral Change on Sanitation and Hygiene. Tanzania respected the right to water as an important human right. Concerning the individual of Maasai, it is categorically we have been stating that indigenous group in the Republic of Tanzania, our position is clear and long-standing. Tanzania has no designated category of indigenous people. Out of the 120 ethnic groups was born a nation, the United Republic of Tanzania, whose people are united by culture, common heritage, values, and custom, as well as the globally celebrated Kiswahili language. It is therefore absurd for any ethnic group to identify themselves as being indigenous than the rest of the ethnic groups in Tanzania. These claims seem to be deliberate effort to undo the gains of essential old national building project in Tanzania, and surely does not serve the interests of Tanzania and its people. Also, I'd like to inform this esteemed commission that there is no history of displacement in Loliondo. In reference number 10 of 2017 filed in the East African Court of Justice, the court dismissed the application for lack of merit as there was no proof of forceful eviction in the Loliondo game controlled area. Additionally, Honorable Chair, Tanzania's land tenure system does not recognize categories such as indigenous or Tanzanians. Also, I would like to inform your esteemed commission that the primary objective of the government is the welfare of the people. The two commissions were launched on the 20th February 2025 by Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania. One addressed land issue in Loliondo, and the second one addressed the voluntary relocation program of residents from the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. The principle of participation has been applied as a representative from the local community, including ordinary citizens and those in decision-making and leadership roles continue in each commission. The objective is to further advise the government. The two commissions have already submitted their report to the President, who now is looking forward to see the recommendation and how to better implement them. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Merci à vous pour votre déclaration. Cette intervention met fin donc à cette séance. Nous allons lever la séance publique pour nous retrouver demain matin pour la cérémonie de clôture et messieurs les commissaires donc, vont se réunir après la pause café dans une autre salle. Je donne la parole à Madame la secrétaire pour son annonce.
Merci beaucoup, Honorable President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, distinguished participants. The Commission has now come to the close of its public proceedings for today. We will break for tea and coffee, and as Honorable Vice Chairperson mentioned, we would resume in private session in another room. So tea and coffee would be served. Excellencies, distinguished participants.
This is not the normal setup. This setup can be changed in almost any setup. Any setup. We normally we remove the front line. Any setup. We normally we remove the front line, change it. Let me show you. Okay. Like the setup can be something like this. You can have. You can have other chairs. This was an ECOWAS event.